Okay. Good evening. Good evening, good evening, good evening, good evening. Well, we can't start this live stream without discussing Jake Paul versus Mike Tyson in Arlington, Texas last night, or early hours this morning. Not a good look for boxing, really. And there was a lot of issues for Netflix viewers with the live stream. And we've had a lot of rumors lately that and reports that Netflix is seriously considering long-term investment in live sports broadcasting. Last night was really not a good advert for that, and it wasn't a good look for professional boxing, in my opinion. And I didn't watch it, but from what I can gather, there's a lot of people online who were very, very disappointed with what they saw and the outcome and the direction that boxing is taking. But Netflix made a lot of money. Jake Paul made a lot of money. Mike Tyson made a lot of money. But in reality, the sport, in my opinion, is going down a direction that is not a good direction. And quite frankly, I worry about the future of the sport going forward and the undercard as well. Fans were not happy with the result of that, the women's fight. So a lot of questions have to be asked of the state of boxing for it to have got to this stage where um, we're discussing how farcical last night was. Really, I'm glad I slept through it. So there you go. I didn't watch it. I didn't care for it, but I do think that it has damaged the image of boxing quite severely. And another reason not to watch it. So there we go. Obviously, we've seen in snooker news Mark King getting a 5-year ban for match fixing. He does have the right to appeal. And again, it's another sport that I've fallen out of love with. And there seems to be a litany of players currently under investigation or suspended for match fixing. And I discussed yesterday's video with my thoughts on the state of snooker and the direction it's heading in. Quite worrying that a player of the standing in the sport like Mark King has fallen afoul of match fixing and got a suspension. I think that is career over. I mean, he's been a professional since 1991. He's 50 years old. He was at one point ranked as high as 11th in the world, so he's not a bad player. He's a very, very decent player, but it's a worrying sign for the sport of snooker that a player of that standing within the sport is another player on a long-term ban. Obviously, the Stephen Lee ban, I think, didn't dissuade players from taking dirty money, fixing matches, throwing frames, and it does raise questions about the integrity of a lot of tournaments that have been played. Now, Joe Perry and John Higgins were the players he was playing in those matches that were investigated. As far as we're aware, and what has been released by the governing body, that there is no suspicion that they were aware that the matches were being fiddled and fixed in some way. But John Higgins is a player with his own issues in regards to match fixing because he's been accused of it himself throughout his career, and there's been allegations levelled against him, and it was proven that he did take bribes in order to throw matches, although he didn't actually throw any matches. So snooker's in a serious situation itself, and we'll have to see what happens there. And it's a worrying sign for the sport that a high-ranking player, high-profile player, is now banned for 5 years. So that's snooker. We've covered that. We can discuss that again, and the state of snooker, and then I could look at how many players are currently banned for match fixing in snooker. I mean, it's quite a few, and it's a worrying trend that snooker is heading down, and it's a sport that I don't watch anymore. With the amount of allegations and the state of the sport, I've lost interest in it. Haven't watched it for a while. I wasn't even aware that Mark King had been suspended for that long. He does have the right to appeal. That's going to be a lengthy process, and it'll be interesting to see if he decides to go down the appeal route and how long that process will take. But I would think that if he does, that will he would be out of the sport for over 2 years. So his career's done. His career's done. I can't see him returning to the sport. I think that's him career done, and he's also got to pay costs as well. So it's been a very expensive suspension for Mark King. Rugby league news. The Brisbane Broncos have now come out and said, through Michael Maguire, they're not planning on sacking Ezra Mam, which is interesting considering there's a lot of pushback from fans of the sport saying he should be sacked to send a message. Josh Adokar, the other player who was under the spotlight for drug driving, he's been signed by the Parramatta Eels. He'll be starting the season suspended. So I don't think they could class the All-Star game as part of his suspension. Also, the Brisbane Broncos are appealing for salary cap relief from the NRL for the Ezra Mam suspension. We don't know how long he's going to be suspended for. He does have a court date in a month's time on December the 16th, so a month from now. He will be appearing in a court in Brisbane, and he's got to face those charges. It's quite serious, although the length of sentence he could receive is below the threshold for the no fault, no stand down policy. So, as I say, we don't know what's going to happen there, but it's very likely we won't see him in a Brisbane Broncos jersey for some time. We won't see him on an NRL field for some time. And so that's a watch this space. But the statements that have been given by the Brisbane Broncos it looks very likely that he's going to retain his roster spot and still be a Broncos player, even if he is suspended forever. For how long his suspension lasts, he's going to remain a Broncos player. And we can debate the pros and cons of that, considering that the Bulldogs did sack Adokar for a serious but less serious offence, very similar offence. And so, I'm not sure if the NRL are going to make a statement on it about player misbehaviour. Are we on the same level as 2017, 2018? I don't think so. I think we're not at that level of off-field indiscretion by players and even administrators, but it's still not a good look when you've got a high-profile player at the biggest club in rugby league for value and one of the biggest fan bases. It's not a good look. It's a damaging look for the NRL, considering the growth strategy they're trying to implement and trying to grow the game overseas and get new fans and grow the game domestically as well. It's not a good look. It really isn't. And the courts and the legal process needs to start treating these players as the rest of society and start dishing out some stronger punishments, because this is a recurring theme off the field. We've had 4 high-profile incidents involving drug taking off the field this season. 3 of them involved motor vehicles. Braden Trindle was the other player. And Braden Trindle was copped a suspension and an internal fine from the club. Adokar's obviously been sacked and moved on. Another club signed him. And Ezra Mam, it's still up in the air because we've got the pending court date in a month's time. So that's quite interesting. Also, obviously, the Nations League has made a return, and a lot has been made of Harry Kane's press conference, where he was asked questions about players withdrawing from the England squad. In total, 9 players have withdrawn from the England squad for these Nations League games. It's the 3rd international break we've had since the start of the season. It has disrupted the league season in the Premiership and the Championship, and of course the top European leagues as well. So you can't really get any continuity going at club level. And a lot of fans have got no interest, and a lot of players have publicly stated they're not really interested in the Nations League as a format. It doesn't really... It's starting to bring up that club country debate again, and it has disrupted the league season quite significantly, which is another thing to think about. And when we're talking about load management, fixture congestion, and player welfare, and a lot of people say these players are exceptionally well paid, which they are. I think they're overpaid, but that's a separate argument. A lot of the players that have come out and said we are playing too many games, or health and fitness and our long-term health post-playing is being impacted. A lot of the players that have come out complaining about their workload, a lot of them are now injured. Rodri is a prime example. He's out for the season. A few days after he said, hey, we are playing a lot of games, it is starting to have a detrimental impact on our well-being and health. He's out for the season, and it's a bad injury. So Yeah, and since he's been injured, Man City haven't won a game, which is quite interesting. And since Oasis have announced their comeback tour, Man City's form has gone back to 90s levels when they were in the Division 3. But that's an interesting one. And Pep Guardiola's, I think, had his first proper crisis as Man City manager. 4 straight losses going into the international break. It'll be interesting to see the fitness of players coming out of the international break and how many players get injured. Few questions. Firstly, thoughts on David Coote's situation and Olympique Lyonnais if they can't pay their debts by the end of the season. I'll start with the Lyon situation. Obviously, in the summer, I made the video discussing how that French football is on its arse. Of course, we saw what happened to Bordeaux and how many other clubs are basically buggered. Lyon is one of the biggest clubs in France. It's got a massive fan base, big following, very successful club historically. I've got to do a club history on them before they end up down the Swanee. It's not good. But the French league doesn't have a decent TV deal. COVID killed the remainder of the TV deal, and PSG's killed French football. So there you go. I've made my views very, very clear on the state of the French game. Historically, very competitive. Since PSG have had all the money, very uncompetitive. And even when Lyon were winning a lot of titles, other French clubs were very competitive in Europe. It isn't the case anymore. The fact that Lyon are in this kind of situation is really worrying, considering their standing in the French game historically. Very successful club, obviously historically, regularly made the last stages of Champions Leagues on the regular. And people said when they won, I think it was 4 titles in a row. Oh, this is disastrous for French football. It really wasn't. PSG has been disastrous for French football. On the David Coote situation, oh dear. I think Howard Webb's position as head of the PGMOL is becoming more and more untenable. And on the David Coote situation, it's very similar to what we saw in rugby league this summer. Well, this winter, obviously in Australia with Latrell Mitchell. You've got to choose your friends better, personally. We've now seen multiple videos that have been recorded within the last year. These are all recent. This is not historical videos going back 5, 10 years or whatever. This is all recent footage of David Coote. He's a high-profile referee. All recent footage taken within the last 12 months. I think within the last 6 months. It's very damning. He's done. He's done. It does raise the question of integrity of officials, though. We have seen some very suspicious refereeing performances, and we've seen some very, very favourable performances to certain clubs. In regards to the situation, though, a lot of pressure on Howard Webb as his boss. The PGMOL is getting panned on social media. Fans are not happy with the state of officiating, and the state of officiating, to be fair, in the English and Scottish games has been poor for a long time. It's been very poor for a long, long time. And there's been questions raised over certain, and I'm going to say certain referees for some time with their integrity. There's a worrying situation here. I think out of this, I think Howard Webb's done. I think Howard Webb's time in charge of the PGMOL is going to come to an end very, very, very quickly. I think his position's now become untenable. I don't think David Coote referees a game again. I think his refereeing career's done. And the fact that the second video, or subsequent videos after the first one, there's clearly drug taking. There's allegations that not only drug use, but supply and purchase of drugs was also, involved, which then leads into links to organised crime and allegations there, and the integrity of the game is considering the issues we've seen with VAR and the video refs and bad errors being made and not just bad errors, but the PGMOL, Howard Webb almost on the weekly is coming out going, yeah, we got that one wrong. It's worrying. The implementation of rule changes, it's not good. It's not good. It really isn't. It's really not. It's not a good look at a time when There's been question marks over the price, TV deal, how much that costs, the whole Man City situation, and the state of the sport going into, the World Cup in a couple of years' time, and the fact that Sweden has dropped VAR. Another major European, footballing nation has dropped the use of VAR at league games, and the clubs and the league listened to fan pushback. The fans were not happy. They were like, "This is not working. This is, impacting the viewing enjoyment." And yeah, there's a lot to it. I think he was in hot water anyway. I think I think his refereeing career is done. I don't think he would have got away with it. I think he was done as soon as that first video surfaced. And yeah, managers and coaches on the touchline, their behaviour needs to be better as well. They're not innocent in this. But at the same time, he's put himself in that position because he was being filmed. And whoever was with him or the people with him have filmed him, knowing that, and somehow this has got out at this time, coming into an international break. It's been leaked. Why the timing? I don't know. The timing is a bit suspicious, in my opinion. Well, the fact it was ranked in a fan poll. I take fan polls and media polls with a pinch of salt because they're limited in scope, in a sense of they have it's a target audience. So if it's one particular publication, it's only going to be the readers of that publication, and it's a limited sample size. So if he was ranked the 5th best, Michael Oliver and Anthony Taylor. I mean, look. I think every referee, we've got to be careful because this could open a Pandora's box that could ultimately lead to further problems. We already have issues in retaining and training referees. There's already problems there at all levels of the game. There's already issues with getting enough referees. We have a refereeing shortage. Games are not going ahead in the lower levels of the non-league. We're talking Sunday League, but we are having an issue in recruiting, training, and retaining, match officials. Without referees and linos and a 4th official, games can't go ahead. So we already have an issue with training, retaining, and protecting. I wouldn't say protecting, but we don't have enough referees. Basically, what I'm getting at, and there is a recruitment problem there. Now, this is quite damaging for referees. Football is not the only sport where the officials get regularly criticised. There's a lot of sports where the match day officials are getting hammered, absolutely hammered on social media and in the media, but especially on social media. And I see this in a lot of sports. I see this in Major League Baseball, where the umpires get hammered quite regularly. I see it in the NRL and Super League and Rugby League. They're getting hammered quite regularly. I've seen it in rugby union, especially at test level. Referees getting hammered quite mercilessly online. Cricket, we've seen the odd umpire cop a fair bit of flack. We've seen it in the NHL with ice hockey, where certain officials get hammered after a game. We've seen it in NBA, NFL, any sport. We've seen any sport. The officials are in the spotlight because of the amount of money involved in professional sport now. The recruiting problem is why you thought he might keep his job. Nah, because he's become so high profile and so public. The integrity is gone because, you could drop him down a league or two, but the integrity is gone. There'll be other clubs going, we don't want him to officiate our games, just because he's got the view on what the former Liverpool manager Jurgen Klopp. Other clubs will go, what happens if the relationship between our manager and himself also sours for whatever reason. There's been a feisty game, it's been a local derby, it's been a high pressure game. It doesn't matter what level we're talking at in the professional or semi-pro ranks. And at some point later on, that manager may have changed clubs, and again they cross paths, and again there's the integrity. It's damaging for the fact that there is a recruitment and retention problem. Social media has changed the landscape when it comes to criticising both teams, players, managers, and officials. Look, at the same time, when you have a lot of players crowding around the referee, I mean, the rule is there that book them. You book the players for basically dissent and unsportsmanlike conduct. It's in the rule book. They need to enforce that. And you look at other sports. You look at, like, I'm going to say this: rugby union, rugby league, both codes of rugby. The refs are fully mic'd up. Players have got suspensions for back chatting the ref and saying that the ref's a cheat or he's hopeless or whatever it is. They get passionate. Players have copped lengthy suspensions for abuse of officials in other sports, and the referees are fully mic'd up. The referees are fully mic'd up. And you will notice the respect that the officials get is a lot better than association football. Now, this is not only on the players and managers taking a bit more responsibility for their actions, but it's a bad look. Football does have this really bad image problem when it comes to respect, on-field respect for the match day officials in comparison to other professional team sports. We have seen obviously blow-ups with coaches and players with officials in the odd game here or there in other sports, and those players and officials, managers, coaches, caught massive fines and lengthy suspensions, which is why it happens so rarely. Whereas with football, it's every game, players crowding around the ref, players crowding around the ref, and it's a cultural thing that's in the sport that's been allowed to fester and hang around for some time, and the referees and therefore the domestic FAs and UEFA and FIFA and higher up haven't done enough to tackle abuse of officials. It's in the rule book, and in certain instances, we've seen following, certain matches, clubs get fined for failure to control their players, and that's been the result of the outcome. But at the time, book the players. There were certain refs you didn't hound and crowd round. Kalina was obviously quite a famous one who was the main man. You didn't crowd round Kalina; he would just book you. And I remember Thomas Repka. Well, I can't remember if it was an international or a European. Thomas Repka squared up to him, and Kalina very quickly put him in his place. And that was that. And Thomas Repka has spent some time in prison. I mean, when Thomas Repka backs down from Pierluigi Kalina, that referee is very respected. 0-0 draw away to Turkey is that a good result? It's a pretty decent result. As the video mentioned, his hatred for Klopp came from Klopp and Robertson shouting a match in lockdown when there was no fans. Look, that's one game. It's one game. I mean, at the end of the day, that's one match several years ago. One incident, really. At the end of the day, the referees give their post-match report, and we don't know, obviously. In my opinion, I think he's allowed one incident to form a judgment and carry on from there. Now, am I a fan of Liverpool? Not really. You know, it's a high pressure environment. There's a lot of stakes. There's a lot at stake. There's a lot of money involved in professional football. It is a high pressure environment. At the end of the day, I mean, Klopp is a quite energetic, passionate manager, which is rare for German managers to get that passionate and worked up. I found that social media is social media. You've got the keyboard warriors, but when you've got a high standing referee in potentially the biggest professional sports league in the world, we can debate where certain the North American pro leagues rank on that, but coming out basically on video, knowing he's being recorded by someone else, making these statements in the full knowledge that at some point that video is going to get. I mean, the fact it was shared in a WhatsApp group, just don't do it. Just don't do it. Someone's obviously gone and made a quick buck and sold that video or those videos to several. The fact that the second one got sold to the Sun. The Sun newspaper is not very popular on Merseyside. In fact, it's pretty much boycotted in various parts of the northwest of England. But the fact that that's ended up in the tabloids and now has done the rounds, and there's other videos apparently, and there's further audio and video footage of David Coop off the field. Basically, I put it this way: everyone's allowed to have a social life. Everyone's allowed to let their hair down, and I'm not gonna be a hypocrite and say don't drink and take drugs, because obviously my past history. But there is a point in the social media age you can't get away with stuff now, and you can definitely tell he's not only had a few. Might have had a beer or two, but he's definitely on something. And then the second video during the Euros just tells you all you need to know. Now, were the PGMOL aware that he potentially may have had a substance abuse issue? That's another thing, and you've got to think of the welfare aspect. But I think he's dug himself a hole by associating himself with people who put him in this position as well. There is obviously responsibility for your own actions, but the fact that, we've seen this before with other people being filmed doing stuff in other sports, players and officials and whatever, and then it gets leaked. I refer back to the Latrell Mitchell situation earlier this year in the NRL when I believe he was either suspended or injured from his club, and he's doing a coaching clinic, which every club will send players to do these coaching clinics when they're not selected for team play or they're recovering from injuries, part of their community program. And again, he was caught on camera doing the same thing as David Coop, and that blew up, and that exposed a lot of issues in regards to that club's culture, considering, the coach is under pressure at the time. You end up getting sacked. The team were losing. The team wasn't playing well, etc., etc., etc. That did expose some issues. Look, the trust in VAR. I mean, look, we're going to see even less trust in the officials on the field now, because we have to assume if one is doing it, others will also, have their views. In regards to Craig Bellamy and his start with the Wales squad, it's a decent start. It's that new manager bounce. It's a different season, though. Players that were not fit last season at various points for selection may be fit now. Other players have developed their game, are in form. We'll have to see if Craig Bellamy can get Wales to the next World Cup. If he can do that, then it has been a brave but risky appointment. There is risk to this appointment from the Welsh FA, but it seems to be paying off at the moment. And we'll have to see if this positive form that Wales have, he can carry on into the next international break. The VAR calls and the trust in the officials, it was already low, yes. I think the quality of officiating and the level of officiating hasn't been great for some time. And again, that puts further pressure on Howard Webb as the referee's boss. There was also forcing for coming out after suggesting he's a Man United fan, but he's not counting. It doesn't matter who he's a fan of. it really doesn't matter who he's a fan of, really, because he can't officiate either Nottingham Forest or Notts County games ever because of his fandom of Notts County. So he can't officiate Nottingham Forest, and I bet you they're glad of that. But at the same time, the trust in officials has reached a new low. Absolutely, I think we can all agree on that. I think is officiating worse. I think the standard is not what it was 20 years ago. I think we can all agree on that. I think the standard of officiating as time has gone, especially with the introduction of VAR and goal line tech, has not been great. And again, that raises questions of currently Howard Webb. He's in charge of the referees at this time, and also previous heads of the PGMOL. But at the moment, it's Howard Webb who's the boss of this. At some point, regardless of what happens to David Coote, but if refereeing standards continue to be subpar, and if there's any other refereeing indiscretions with off-field issues like David Coote's, I think the pressure is going to build. And at some point, I think his job will become untenable because the situation is not good enough. And there's a lot of money at stake here. There's people's jobs at stake here. I mean, there's a lot at stake. And the way VAR is working at the moment, or not, it's made the game worse, in my opinion. It's less enjoyable. And the footballing authorities, I mean, there's a lot of other issues that football has at the moment. And, with the backdrop of what's happening with Man City basically with their battle with the Premier League over sponsorship rules, as well as their 115 charges and bending the rules and all that, there's a lot of negativity around the sport. The 3 international breaks heavily criticised across Europe. The Club World Cup, a lot of fans don't want it. A lot of players don't want it. The people are saying the format of the European competitions and how, FC Heidelheim, for example, are doing really well in the Conference League, and how certain clubs are doing really well, and it has shaken things up a little bit. At the end of the day, it's still meaning more games, more pointless games, dead rubbers, a more congested fixture calendar. And as I said during the Euros in the summer, I felt the quality of games, it went off a cliff very, very quickly. The first week and a half of the Euros was really, really good. A lot of goals being scored, and then the goals per game average dropped off a cliff. The quality of play dropped off a cliff. Very noticeably, the quality just went. And yeah, I wouldn't say it was complete garbage, but as the tournament wore on, you could definitely see the players were out on their feet after 15, 20 minutes of play in a game. And it was very, very obvious. It didn't matter the nation. Some nations seem to have more energy and seem to be fresher than others. And I think some of the lesser nations really, like Georgia and Albania, for example, really show that they belonged at that level. But it wasn't great. It wasn't the best. No. Not worth celebrating a goal anymore because VAR will check it and probably rule it out. Yeah. The Euros was garbage. I wouldn't say it was garbage. I wouldn't say it was great. I wouldn't say it's the worst tournament we've seen. I don't think it ranks on the same level as USA '94 or South Africa in 2010. But it wasn't highlight reel. Let's just say that. They've got recruitment dropping. What can they do? Get Dave off the street. At this point, Dave or Gary from Harlow in Essex might do a better job. Not joking there. I do think we do have an issue, and there's going to be growing calls to scrap VAR. It's not worked as intended, even though the semi-automated seems to work. Because we're playing more games, the referees are reffing more games as well. So, and most referees are in their 40s, 30s to 50s, I think is the age range. So the referees aren't, spring chickens themselves. Yeah, the Euros was really enjoyable except for the last 5 minutes of the final. England were lucky. I don't know how England made the final, to be honest. A lot of people are still working out how Gareth Southgate's made 2 Euros finals and a World Cup semi-final, a World Cup quarter-final. Yeah, we're working that one out. Apart from England, Netherlands, the Yamar goal versus France, namely memorable. There were a few memorable games in there, but as I say, in my opinion, you could definitely see the fatigue level was there, and the energy levels just weren't there. And the pitches weren't great, and I was really surprised with the quality of the playing surfaces, considering in 2006 when Germany hosted the World Cup, the pitches were almost like carpets. So I'm really surprised with how the pitches were poor, and the players just were out on their feet. It was very obvious very early on in the tournament that there were a lot of players who just were shattered from the league season and the European club competitions. They were just exhausted. It was clear and obvious they were exhausted. Oh, well, clear and obvious went out the window. Well, the clear and obvious mistakes and the remit. They keep fiddling with the rules, and they've changed the interpretation of certain rules, I think you could argue. Oh my god, let me just get this all set up because my back is gone. The clear and obvious, yeah. Look, I mean, back in 2018, and I will stress this, when we had the World Cup in Russia, we can all debate whether that should have been hosted by Russia or not, but that's again neither here nor there. I think we had a good basis for what VAR should be. What has happened is the following year in 2019, during the Women's World Cup, they tinkered with it. They made further adjustments to the rules because it was the women's game. They couldn't do it in the men's game because there was too much scrutiny, so they did it in the women's game. And they fiddled with the rules some more. They had a good basis in 2018, and you fast forward to 2024, and I think it's very clear and obvious that in Sweden, it obviously hasn't worked because they've stopped using it at league level, which is very important. When you've got a domestic FA like the Swedish FA or the Swedish Football Federation, I can't remember if it's Swedish Football Federation or Swedish FA, but when Sweden, which is a major player when it comes to European football, when they have stopped using it for their league games, that sends a message to UEFA and FIFA. And the Swedish FA have been very, very clear for some time that they're not happy with the direction the game is going in regards to a variety of issues. And there is a division within UEFA as well. Bellingham and so there's clearly issues with the implementation and the use of VAR as an officiating tool. I am surprised on a standpoint where other sports have more successfully implemented video technology and off-field officials assisting the on-field officials. They were so far behind in regards to the uptake on further tech. That really stunned me. How long it took just to get goal line tech. It took until 10 years ago to get goal line tech. That was quite stunning as well. Bellingham, the Bellingham goal, yeah, obviously saves England from an early elimination. And I think Southgate stayed on too long. I don't think Harry Kane should have been made captain in the first place. Somehow he's assumed a leadership role, but then he's criticising fellow English players from withdrawing from the squad for injury concerns or whatever reason. He doesn't strike me as the best leader of a group from the outside. I I think the FA were just looking at the results rather than how we got there, which is a problem. And you could argue we got a little bit unlucky against Italy, and Rashford's penalty bounces in off the post. We're having a different discussion, but at the same time, not good enough is the answer in regards to how we got there. Is look, we made finals. And you could argue the final at Wembley. I think we had a better opportunity than the final in Berlin, and we played better in the previous tournament. And I think that there was a good basis, and it just went flat. And you do have to look at Southgate's selections, tactics, and style of play, and we can debate that until the sun goes down. In regards to what in regard to the offside calls, I mean, Lewandowski's one this week. It's a joke. We know it's a joke. Fans across Europe are not happy with the implementation. Even the semi-automated, it's not working. Let's be clear. Snooker is dead. Mark King match fixing, no surprise. I think Stephen Lee, when he got a 10-year ban, I think was really that was a Pandora's box. And then we didn't hear of any bans for a while. And then in the last, I think I'm going to say since about 2018. So basically, since this channel's existed, there's been multiple investigations, multiple suspensions, and multiple players banned. But Mark King, I think, in my opinion, is a potentially a bigger name than Stephen Lee, in my opinion. The fact that he has got banned after being suspended for the best part of 2 years, he does have the right to appeal, but I don't think he does. If he does go through the appeals process, that does take a long time. It won't be simple. It won't be easy. It won't be quick. And he would have been at that point out of the game for 2 years. But it is damaging for snooker. There is no doubt the Mark King ban, I think, probably is more damaging for the reputation of snooker than Stephen Lee's. But then you look at Barry and Eddie Hearn and their involvement in promoting the sport and investing, and it is concerning because where they go, corruption isn't far away. Never been a fan of them. Really concerning with the direction the sport's taking, with the amount of players under investigation and the amount of players currently banned and suspended. It is troubling. It is very, very troubling. Right, where are we? With Bellingham's goal. Bellingham was that's one of the best. It's obviously a momentum swinger. It is a very, very good goal, Bellingham's goal. And is it the best goal we've seen in final? It's one of the best England goals I've seen in a while. Let's just say that. If England would have won, it would have been removed full time. Yeah, but I think it would have definitely given a boost to a lot of players' confidence had we won. But then you've got to try and then live up to that expectation at every tournament after that. It's very difficult. You don't see Kane playing past 35. I don't know how much longer Harry Kane can play. I mean, he is starting to become injury prone. If he's good enough for Bayern, he's good enough for England. He wasn't good enough for Bayern last season because they didn't win anything. He might have got a lot of goals, but it didn't help the team. Harry Kane has gone missing at times in some big games. He has been either marked out of the game or just doesn't play particularly well. Both goals came from Kyle Walker being out of position. Kane came straight after the William. Oh, Carl Walker. I mean, he's been struggling. Carl Walker didn't have a great Euros, and he hasn't really had a great season so far for Man City, especially in their four-game losing run. He's been badly exposed positionally, but he's always had issues positionally. I think Carl Walker is exceptionally overrated as a player. Um, he just happens to be part of a very, very successful setup with Manchester City. Um, in a Champions League semi-final, you just know Harry Kane will have no impact. I don't see that changing now at his age. I hope I'm wrong. He needs to. Um, Harry Kane he's an interesting player because I think I don't think he's a bad, but he just has a trophy curse. It seems, which is unfortunate because he has scored a lot of goals and he has been a very good servant for professional football, and he has done very, very well on an individual level, but he's just not won any winners' medals. And some players, he's just one of those players who, when his career ends, if he hasn't won something, that's going to be a head scratcher. It's a head scratcher why he hasn't. But Spurs had a great opportunity when he was there. They had several great opportunities while he was there, and they came up short in a variety of scenarios. You could argue, was that down to the coaching? Was that down to how the team was built? You know, did they peak too early in a said season? They had a trophy window and they failed to close on it. And I feel sorry for Postecoglou now at Spurs. I think, the fan base and the club, they think they're a big six, but in reality, just because of their stadium, without that stadium, they're not a big six club. And you got to look at Joe Lewis and Daniel Levy and the ownership and do they want to win trophies or do they just want to be just making money? Um, Best player never to win a trophy. That's an interesting one. Hmm, that's a very interesting one. There are some very, very good players who never won anything. That's a real interesting one. I would say Letizia, yeah, but Letizia was a one man, one club, one man kind of dynamic with Southampton because he had opportunity. Letizia had opportunities to go to other clubs and have a crack. He turned down Man United. I believe he turned down Everton as well at a time when Everton actually won the FA Cup. So Matt Letizia for me would be a player who was undervalued by England and didn't win a trophy at club level because I think the season that Southampton went to the FA Cup final, he was out injured for most of that season. And they could have used him on the field that day against Arsenal. They may have won the FA Cup that year, but that was I think his second last season or last season, and he was out injured for most of it. You were officially a child when Spurs last won a trophy. I was, oh God, that was the League Cup 2008. So I would have been 18. God, I'm old. That's a long time ago. That's a long time ago. Um, wow. Now I feel old. But yeah, I mean that just sums up how long Spurs have gone without silverware. But then Villa and Everton have gone since 1995. So Villa and Everton has been 30 years. And you look at their success in the game, um, and that tells you a lot about where those clubs have been at over the last 3 decades. And Villa have spent some time out the Premier League in that time as well. I mean, Nottingham Forest. I think it's Nottingham Forest. Was it 88 they last won a trophy? I think it was 88 Nottingham Forest last won a trophy, which was before I was born. That's over 36 years, something like that. So there's some clubs that have gone a very, very long time who've been very, very successful, which shows competitiveness of the league and competitive nature of the league pyramid. But there are some clubs that have gone a very, very long time. Very long time. Do Leeds think they are bigger than they are? Their trophy haul is. Leeds have got a very good trophy cabinet. Just look at the history video I've done them. I would say Leeds had their golden spell in the 60s and 70s. It's been a long time since Leeds were successful. They've had trophies since then, but Leeds had a period of success, I wouldn't say brief period, but there was a period of success for Leeds. But at the same time, they have a very sizable fan base, but they've also been run very badly as a football club, which has contributed to where they've been at for most of the last 20 years. There's a reason why they haven't been at the top table for a long time, alongside a lot of other clubs as well, who are former Premier League clubs that have had success. There's a reason why, Leeds, Blackburn, Bradford City, and a whole host of other former Premier League clubs, although Leeds have had their stint back in the Premier League. Portsmouth, for example, they've all struggled in recent times, and it's partly to do with really bad ownership, quite frankly, and the fact that the Premier League and the FA and all that allow certain ownership groups to take over when they did. And it does highlight the weakness in the ownership system that we have. And it does highlight how distorted the revenue streams are, and the haves and have-nots. And it is worrying for the English game. Have Blackburn won more major honours? Again, I've done the history videos, so I'll have to revisit them. But, at the same time, I've got some more club history video ideas to think about, and some more clubs to look at. And a lot of them are obviously on the continent and looking at European clubs. But at some point, I will look at ranking clubs by trophy count, and it will stun you where certain clubs sit in the trophy count. But at the same time, neither club has been successful for a lengthy spell. And again, that sums up where the English game is at right now. And of course, we don't know the outcome of what's going to happen to Manchester City. And we don't know what the ramifications of that outcome will be. And that will have knock-on consequences, not only for the English game, but the European game. And, then we can argue whether, allowing basically nation states to buy football clubs is another thing. West Ham have no league titles, and Forest, I think, only have the 1 or 2 league titles, but more European trophies. It's weird. It's weird how it all works out. Everton, very historical club in regards to success, founder of the Football League. Newcastle, again, very successful historically, and then it stops. And it's really, really interesting when you look at it, how long certain clubs have gone without tasting success. And, that in itself, really is very, very surprising. And I don't know what else you can add to that. And it took Man City a long time to get success again, and admittedly, it did take a fair few seasons from the current ownership taking over for them to get that first trophy. When they got that first trophy, they figured out how to win a second and then a third, and then, as you can tell, the rest is now history. But at the same time, this season they've had a bit of a crisis. It's the first time under the current ownership they've lost 4 games in a row. It's the first time Guardiola's lost 4 games in a row as a manager. And the cracks are starting to appear there a little bit. Oh yeah, well, the Arsenal move to the Emirates. Yeah, that's an interesting one. But again, they had their period under Arsene Wenger, and then the game evolved around them. The fact that West Ham have won the Cup Winners' Cup and the Conference League, but not the Premier League surprises. But West Ham have never won the league. That surprises me. That's the big surprise for me is they've never had a league title, but they've had a lot of success in the FA Cup and they've had success in Europe. But you have to look at it and go, okay, why is that? Why is it that they've only ever had success in cup competitions? It's an interesting one. It's a very interesting one. But then you can look at clubs like Portsmouth and go, they have won league titles. And again, it's very, very interesting how you can look at certain clubs' success and failures and when they had their success. And West Ham have never had a dominant team. They've had good seasons, but they've never had a dominant team. They've had some very good players, though. Can we, though? Because Portsmouth, the club is the city is the club. It's a one-team town, whereas West Ham have to compete with other clubs in Greater London for fan base. Fan base wise, I think Portsmouth have got a very sizable fan base. I think people underestimate the size of Portsmouth's fan base because it's Portsmouth and Southampton basically make up the professional clubs in Hampshire with decent fan bases, and they are. It really, Hampshire is a very interesting county, but Portsmouth and Southampton, they're the 2 big clubs in that part of England, and you'll be surprised. Portsmouth have got a very large fan base, very large. Oh, look, Huddersfield were the first club to win 3 league titles in a row, yes, and a lot of people don't realise that. Huddersfield is a very, very, very important sporting location for 2 reasons. One, it's the birthplace of rugby league in 1895, and 2, they're the first English club to win 3 league titles in a row. Herbert Chapman. I've got to do a video on Herbert Chapman because the impact on the game he has had. First manager to use 4-4-2 as a formation, and one of the most successful managers in real terms in the history of the game. Preston have only won 3 trophies, league and cup double in the first Football League season, and then the league title the following season, and they're done. I think I've done it in one of the history videos. It's come up. I think it's either Cardiff or it's either Cardiff. It's a very weird one. It's a club that has won silverware, but I think it's either Cardiff. Yeah, I think I've covered that. I think I've covered it in both the Huddersfield and Cardiff City club history videos. I know it's come up in conversation before, and I knew it's. I wouldn't say it's an obscure club, but it's an interesting one that it went down to the last day of the season and it came down to goals per game average or goals scored. It came down to a tiebreaker, and how rare is the tiebreaker being used to differentiate between first, second, and Yeah, it's an interesting one. I find it funny that the biggest clubs in Wales play in England and not in Wales, and we've discussed that before in regards to um, the Welsh Cup and how they're currently not allowed to enter the Welsh Cup, and the Welsh FA are considering changing that rule, and it's very interesting. I'm glad because it would, yeah, yes, yeah, the Welsh Cup. Um, they're considering allowing, is it Wrexham or I don't know. The Welsh FA have realised that their decision, I think it was in '96, I think the last time the English-based Welsh clubs were allowed to enter the Welsh Cup. Um, yeah, I think would it benefit the Welsh game? I don't know. Would that mean the Welsh clubs can't participate in the League Cup, for example, to balance out their fixturing? That's another question we could have, because obviously the four Welsh clubs will also participate in the League Cup, the FA Cup, and if they participate in the Welsh FA Cup on top of their league campaigns, that becomes quite interesting in regards to fixturing, considering obviously the debate over fixture congestion, workload, and load management and player welfare. Sacrifice League Cup for Welsh Cup if you could potentially get European football. It's a trade off. It's a trade off. I don't know what you could potentially argue is it's the lesser of two evils potentially. In a way, you could argue it's the lesser of two evils. Would it actually benefit the Welsh game? You know, by bearing in mind these clubs don't play under the Welsh FA league system, they're playing under the English league system, which is governed by the English FA. You could argue that we need to look at investment in the Welsh game in some way. Is this the way to do it? There's a lot of questions that need answering as to why suddenly, after the best part of 30 years, they want to reverse the decision they took back in the mid-90s when they stopped the Welsh clubs playing in England in the English system from participating in their domestic cup competition. And you could argue the pros and cons at the time and the pros and cons of allowing them back in, and whether that would benefit or hinder the competition in Wales and the club finances. Cardiff have 46 championship games and Conference League football. I mean, that would be, yeah. I mean, look. I mean, as I say, I mean, there has to become a point where we have to look at it and go seriously. Look at it and go. Is the current model and the current structures we have in place sustainable? Is the sport being governed in the right way, and is the investment going to the right places? And there's a lot of those answers are no. And yeah, it has to be looked at and discussed of the state of the game, and the direction the sport's taking, and the issues the sport is facing in a lot of locations. And as I say, we circle back to what's happening in Lyon with Olympique Lyonnais and the potential of them getting thrown out of the French league. Hypothetically, they could win the French league, but they've still got the debts, and the way the French system works with administration and debt, you just get thrown out of the league. Whether that's the right way to do it or not, that's another thing. But as I said back in the summer when I did the French football video and discussing the finances and the crisis that the French game finds itself in. It's true. They cannot find a media rights partner to plug the gap and the lost revenue from the collapse of the TV deal during COVID. The state of the game, because of PSG's infinite wealth, is uncompetitive. The other teams just cannot compete on the same level. And Lyon has spent a lot of money upgrading their stadium as well. I mean, Bordeaux going belly up was bad enough. Lyon going, questions do have to be asked of the French Football Federation, the French League, the failure to get a media rights partner or partners, a decent TV deal in place. And then you have to look at average attendance, the lack of success of French clubs in Europe over a significant period of time. And this is going to be one of the top leagues in Europe. How the French have had a reasonably successful national program is beyond me. How they can continue to produce players when their clubs are going bust. I mean, at some point, they need to look at the situation and go, how it's been allowed to get to this point is beyond me. This is the short answer to this. Would you care either way if there was a back entrance into Europe for 4 Welsh clubs? I would be concerned that they would just be the whipping boys in Europe, and it would actually hurt them having a European season domestically. It would be nice to see the Welsh clubs get back into the Premier League, any of them, which I think would massively benefit the national side. If a Welsh club was to get into Europe whilst they're still in the lower leagues, I think ironically would do more harm than good to them. And that's just me being honest. I think it would do more harm than good for the 4 Welsh clubs if they were to get into European competition because of the level they play at currently. It would hamper their league campaign, no doubt. And they would have to make a trade-off. If they were to enter the Welsh Cup, they would have to sacrifice either the League Cup or the FA Cup. They would have to make a sacrifice, and I think the League Cup and the FA Cup make more revenue for them than the Welsh Cup would. So I can't see them. I think there's a lot of risk involved that could have consequences that could be negative for them at some point and may be detrimental. Well, what Welsh club makes the Premier League next? That's a good question. I think the plan, obviously, the Wrexham roadmap that they put out, and that is the ownership. They have put this roadmap out as they are aiming for Premier League at a sustainable rate. So they're not expecting them to do back-to-back promotions and all this stuff. They want to do it sustainably, whereby when they do get to the Premier League, they can sustain themselves in the Premier League and consolidate and then take, the next step. But, obviously Swansea and Cardiff are above them in that regard. The league above, but they're not playing particularly well, and they had their chances when they were Premier League clubs to stabilise and become solid top flight sides, and they didn't consolidate. And Swansea won a League Cup whilst they were a top flight side. They didn't take that next step and do it and consolidate and be sustainable. I think again, both clubs have had their opportunities. Swansea gave it a good crack for a while. They did win some silverware, but they're not, a top flight club now. Cardiff, you've got to look at the ownership there and how dysfunctional that club is. Newport, I mean, they're lucky to have reformed the way they have and to be in the top four leagues. I think for them, at some point, potentially take that next step to get to League One. I think Wrexham have got the best ownership and the best opportunity in regards to the long-term planning. But at the same time, it's just good that we've got, Wrexham back in the Football League and 4 Welsh clubs in the Football League. But Cardiff are dysfunctional. Swansea underachieving. Newport, I think, potentially have overachieved a little bit, potentially. And Wrexham, I think, are the best off-the-field club at the moment. Newport are the smallest club. I mean, they've had to reform. They're playing at a rugby ground, basically. The economics of the area isn't great, so it's not as if you can charge your fan base an extortionate amount of tickets. You've got to be reasonable. So it is what it is. It's not a great ground though. But at the same time, they're limited with their facilities. They're limited with what they have financially. At the same time, I mean, they have got a solid fan base. They've got a passionate fan base, and hopefully, they can take that next step. We'll have to see. 86,000 seconds. Well, we can just do something quite simple, and we can go bye-bye. So there we go. We got rid of him. Look, that's the first. Look. To be fair, they've had to be subscribed for an hour, so fair dues for wasting an hour of their lives. It just helps the channel's algorithm, doesn't it, with view count and view hours? So oh look, I have to admit, it happens. There are some whack jobs out there. There's a reason why I stopped doing live streams for a little while. It's partly because of that. It just got to the point where it became quite unenjoyable, and it ruined the experience for everyone. And unfortunately, the powers that be at YouTube they just don't seem to take any action. It doesn't matter how you. Sometimes I just find it funny with the persistence. I really do. I do find it funny with the persistence at times. But I think every creator on the platform at some point has had to deal with, the bots, the trolls. Sports personality of the year. I haven't watched sports personality of the year for, I'm going to say about 10, 15 years. That's a good while. Since I last watched sports personality of the year. I think we've seen how the format and the program and the voting process has been criticised for a very long time. I'm not even sure what the viewing figures are anymore. I think there has been a political element to it. I think there has been an agenda in regards to the programming, and it has. I haven't watched it for a long time. A long time. I think there's some sports that don't get represented for the efforts they put in and the growth that we've seen. And look, I love my sport, but at the same time, there is a political and social agenda that's crept in that for many, many years, we were always told, sport should be politically neutral, and we use it as an escape from our, day-to-day humdrum existence. And since it's definitely been in the lifetime of the channel, I can tell you that. And it's been very noticeable in the lifetime of the channel that we basically had sort of that. I understand it's difficult, but there has been like a narrative that's crept in. There has been a narrative that's crept in, and it troubles me that it's becoming quite divisive. And then the media side of things, when it comes to the commentary, the related programming, when it comes to highlight shows and panel shows, has also gone down a similar route where instead of getting the best for the job, regardless of background or ethnicity or gender, there seems to be we're going to insert this person here because, and there's a term in America when it comes to the NFL. You've got the Rooney Rule. You have to have a minimum number of black or minority coaches apply for roles. It's done nothing to actually improve the quality of coaching. It's actually made it worse, and it's done nothing to encourage more African American men to become coaches. If anything, it's damaged the quality of coaching, and it's put people off staying in the sport as coaches. The Rooney Rule, positive discrimination, is exactly the same as negative discrimination. It does not work. It creates more division, and it actually hurts what you're trying to achieve. The Rooney Rule just doesn't work. It's never have. And we're seeing that in regards to sports broadcasting. That how to describe it? That forced diversity. There you go. Rather than get the best person for the job. If they happen to be a woman, fantastic. And change happens at grassroots level, never from top down. Well, why doesn't the NFL insist on more Asian football players? Partly because there isn't an interest in the Asian communities to do that. There's just no interest, as far as I can gather. There has obviously been a mass influx of immigrants to North America from the Indian subcontinent. So that's India, Pakistan, Sri Lanka, Bangladesh, and aspects of Southeast Asia and Pacifical, Japan and all that. Over many, many generations, the Southeast Asian, like the Filipino and the Taiwanese, Chinese community, they like baseball. The Indian subcontinentals, they obviously like cricket and field hockey, which aren't particularly popular sports in North America, although cricket is growing in popularity, and they do want to grow that sport professionally. Well, in regards to the NFL want black coaches, they brought in the Rooney Rule because social pressure groups wanted it. But it actually hasn't done anything to improve A, the quality of coaching overall, and B, the number of high quality African American black coaches. Positive discrimination doesn't work. As we found out with the recent American election, the Democratic Party basically uses the minority vote of African Americans and Latinos to get power, but doesn't do anything for those communities, as proven for the last 50 years. It's a thing. So basically, the liberal side of American sports governance and sports fandom and sports media has pushed the Rooney Rule, And what's it achieved? Has any African American coach ever won the Super Bowl since the Rooney Rule's been a thing? Has it actually improved the quality of coaching across the board? Has it improved the numbers of coaches in the NFL and collegiate American football? Is there a want from ex-players of all backgrounds to get how many of the current coaching setup were ex-NFL players? How many current NFL players want to become coaches because they actually earn more money being NFL players than coaches post-career? It's the same. We've had the same argument in association football. We've had the same argument in every professional sport: rugby league, rugby union, ice hockey, cricket. The amount of players who drop out of the game altogether and have no interest in media or coaching commitments, and they leave the sport altogether. This is the thing. There's only a limited number of coaching and assistant and associate coaching spots available. Right? There's only a limited number because the NFL does not have a minor league affiliate system where other sports do, where you can learn your trade and work your way up through an organization. So, for example, and I'm going to use Sheldon Keefe in the NHL as an example, not because he's, a winning coach, but he was in the Toronto Maple Leafs organization with their AHL affiliate for some time in the Marlies. The head coaching role becomes available. It's available. He gets promoted from within. Because of that, he now has an NHL coaching career because I believe he's at New Jersey right now and doing rather well. So he got his opportunity at the top elite level because he was working at the lower league level. The NFL doesn't have that. You have collegiate or nothing. Yes, you have the CFL, but the CFL, again, there's how many CFL teams are there? There's 9. So you have a limited number of professional American football teams. So I think it's like, is it 41 or 39 head coaching roles available? And all of them are locked up right now, long term. So if want to be a coach, you're limited with 9 CFL teams, and I think it's 30. Might be 32 NFL franchises. I can't remember. It's either 30 or 32. But so there you go. The professional NFL, where you have stability, and CFL, you have not a lot of teams. So automatically, there's only a number. How many vacancies per season? How at the end of every season, how many teams will want to change coach? How many vacancies are there going to be in the off season? Not a lot. And the only other way to get coaching experience is to go into the collegiate system. And some colleges pay a lot more than others, and there's no standard. This is how much you get paid. It depends on what the college budget is, and that can be wildly different, not only from college to college, but between NCAA divisions and how much their budget is for their athletics program. So there is not a lot of opportunity, and you're only stuck in the one continent, in two countries where the game is professional. Whereas in other sports, you have more opportunity to develop your coaching experience by coaching at lower levels upwards. And again, as I say, you are limited with the amount of coaching positions available. So if you have to have a minimum number of applicants from an African American community, it's a difficult one because you just do not have the vacancies available to be fair to all to get the best person for the job. It should go down to best for the job, but unfortunately, you have a limited number of vacancies, and a limited. This is the problem with American football. Other sports, such as such as basketball, because there's other pro leagues around the world, you can get a head coaching gig. Ice hockey, many pro leagues around the world, you can get a head coaching gig or an assistant coaching gig. Association football leagues all over the world, you're very likely to get a gig somewhere at a club side or an international side. Rugby league, okay, limited in regards to the amount of professional clubs, but there's more professional teams around the world than American football. And of course, national sides as well. You're very likely to get a coaching gig. Plus, rugby union, same thing. Cricket, pretty similar in regards to multiple nations playing, and then you have the various T20 competitions and domestic professional competitions. So other sports, you have a greater opportunity to find work, learn that experience before you reach the top level. Well, you say they don't necessarily make good coaches. Some have done very, very well and had decent coaching careers at both collegiate and NFL, CFL level. That's not the problem. What is the problem is that a small minority in the media and in politics have driven this agenda, which is across all sport professionally, which is a big problem. Because we pride ourselves on our sports being basically politically neutral, but it's an issue. And there's this liberal agenda, which has clearly backfired because we've seen what's happened, obviously, with the recent US presidential election. And there has been this agenda for a good couple of decades, and I'm going back to the Clinton era, and it's had consequences because it hasn't changed a damn thing. It hasn't. And yes, there are social ills, and yes, there are problems, and changes do need to be made, and that's down to cleaning up the sport, quite frankly. And but at the same time, well, look, we've seen, a they're very divisive policies, basically. Very divisive policies. And yeah, look, we have seen obviously pushback. A lot of people don't like the discrimination of any kind because it actually that is a very divisive thing. But we've seen the pushback and we've seen the consequences of it. I mean, look, we saw it with English football and the fan reaction to what the players taking the knee. Now it lost all meaning very, very quickly, and then it later transpired that the BLM movement, a lot of people didn't realise that it was extremely left-wing Marxist, but also the founders of the protest movement were stealing the funds and funding a very lavish lifestyle, do as we say, not as we do kind of, kind of thing. Yes, police brutality is wrong, but at the same time, there was a lot of division there. It spilled over across the Atlantic. We get lumbered with it, and there was pushback, and yet the players still do it. I think at this point, fans have just gone. They're going to do it regardless of how we don't want it. We want the politics taken out. And then if you complain about it, you're labelled right wing, because that's a great way to do it, and it creates further division. Yeah, at the same time, we've had the Kick It Out campaign and Rainbow Laces and a whole other host of social campaigns and charities, and questions have been asked of their financing and where the money's going and why, something's amiss, a bit amiss here. And then we've had issues with fan behaviour and heightened tensions at games, and now we're seeing what's happening with Maccabi Haifa and the Israeli national side, and the rather negative response and the issues we saw in Amsterdam last week, and the issues we've seen in Paris this week with the Nations League. And it's something that's it's a thing. I can't speak on who what your employer does and doesn't do in regards to their employment policies. It bewilders me how your ability to do your job is impacted by ticking boxes. It does bewilder me, but this is it's something that does more harm than good, in my opinion. There are, I think, potentially better ways to achieve and better methods to use. If you want to use sport as a vehicle to bring social balance and social cohesion and raise social issues, I think there's better ways of going about it. I think the FA and the Premier League and the Football League, I think, have definitely not read the room. I think the way they persisted with it for as long as they did, I think, created a lot more division rather than unity at a time when we needed unity rather than division. And social media hasn't helped. And I know I'm on a social media platform and we're discussing it, but common sense left the room some time ago in regards to a lot of issues. And I've been saying this for years in regards to sport. Common sense in regards to sports governance left the room years ago, because professional sport continues to put profits over people, chases the money, regardless of where the money comes from, until that one particular nation where the money's coming from is not flavour of the month. And then suddenly they don't want that money anymore, but they were happy to take it for the previous 20 years. So in regards to, this came up in the last live stream, in regards to Russia and how long they're going to be out in the sporting political wilderness, and whether they're going to be allowed back into the international sporting fold, you've got to remember, for the previous 2 decades, organisations like UEFA and the IIHF were more than happy to take Russian sponsorship money from Gazprom and other big Russian companies. They were more than happy to have Russia host events, FIFA with the World Cup, the IOC with the Winter Olympics. until it was not favourable to do so. They were more than happy to take Russian money. What did Southgate? I think Southgate, look, Southgate. Well, look, I think he did put pressure on himself. I think he put added pressure on the players with some of his press conferences, regardless of their backgrounds and the communities they were from. Whether that was intentional or unintentional, I don't know. I think he mishandled a lot of tactical decisions. I think he mishandled a lot of the press conferences, which didn't help with winning over the fan base. I think 2018 and 2020, I think to a fair point, there was a shift in a positive direction. The exits from both those tournaments and how those tournaments ended, okay, not what was wanted. But I do think as time went on, I wouldn't just say he put pressure on the players in the 2020 Euro final, which was played obviously 2021. But I do think the way he handled player selection, tactics, press conferences, pre and post match, also he's got his advisors as well. I think the FA have got a lot of things wrong over many years in regards to how a lot of things have been dealt with. I think that's fair to say. I think Southgate got a lot of things wrong. Was I a fan of the style of play? No, but I think the FA were judging it on results. I think after the World Cup in Qatar, I think he should have gone. But at the same time, his win percentage speaks for itself. Tournament progression speaks for itself, but at the same time, there was always a lot of question marks over the positivity in the camp. Were they all united in regards to the direction the team was taking? The press conferences gave a lot away. And I think they spent too much time on social political causes that distracted from what they could do, which was they could unite the country regardless of colour or creed or religion. And then the press conferences came, and they didn't read the room, and they persisted in following a path which they didn't read the room. And so the relationship between Southgate, the media, and the fan base, and I think the players, you could see that it wasn't working. You could see there was definite issues there from the outside in. You could see that it wasn't a harmonious camp, regardless of what the players were saying. I think as time went on, there were definite splits within the dressing room there and within the squad. And you could definitely see players who clearly weren't happy with the direction Southgate was taking things. Now, Ben White has hinted that he's willing to return to the England setup. That is interesting, but he's not the only player that basically turned his back on the England setup. Let's be honest. While Southgate was in charge, we obviously had a couple of real high-profile players. I mean, Jamie Vardy's still playing, for Christ's sake, who basically said we're basically quitting the international scene because of Southgate. And I think that did hurt England's depth at times and options. And when you've got players basically saying, I'm not going to play international football anymore because this guy's in charge, that's a problem. Even though they could have contributed to potential success and potential development of the team. When you got players saying, yeah, you know what, I don't want to play for my country because of the manager and the direction he's taking it. There's being professional and it doesn't work. So clearly there were issues behind the scenes, and I think as time comes on, someone in their biography or autobiography is gonna say it wasn't all positivity and all working together. There were divisions there. Every international team has that. Every club team has that. Not everyone is gonna get on with everyone, but I do think there was a feeling of negativity and conservatism in regards to how the team approached things and how they played and style of play. There was a definite feeling that all was not positive within that setup for some time. And I do think there was a moment, I'm going to say, before the beginning of the Qatar World Cup cycle. So as soon as the Euros was done, Wembley final, the aftermath of that Wembley final, I think Southgate made a lot of mistakes tactically. And I think the FA have made a lot of mistakes. Going back to when Stuart Pearce, in my opinion, should have been given the job full time. Honestly. Big Sam Allardyce should never have been considered for the England job at all. Stuart Pearce should have been the guy that they went with at that time. He came in as interim, did his interim job, stepped aside. I think that's the mistake they made. That's the mistake they made, personally. And now we've obviously got Thomas Tuchel, and the response from a lot in the media, considering they were looking at, the list of options, and they're going, oh yeah, these potential foreign managers who could come in, the English game, but the English media are acting like it's still 1944, not 2024. A proportion of it, as a proportion of the fan base, that will always lap up what a lot of the right wing rags will print. And that's a proportion of the fan base, but I do think the FA have made a lot of mistakes. I think the English game as a whole has, the sport as a whole has made a lot of mistakes, but I do think on the English game as a whole, there's been a lot of mistakes made as well. We've got to look at the quality of coaching development, and why a lot of ex-players leave the sport completely, and they don't get their coaching badges, and they don't want to stay within the game. We also have to look at the turnover of coaches at clubs and the job uncertainty that, or the managerial merry-go-round, as I call it, in football. You are hired to be fired, basically. So there's just no point in making long-term plans unless you are a handful of clubs. Where you get a job, you're pretty much guaranteed a year and a half, 3 years if you're lucky. You are hired to be fired. As the saying goes these days. So there's no stability at coaching level or managerial level. You're not given any job security, which is very, very hard to plan for, especially if you've got a family. To constantly be moving around. You've got to think of housing, education for your kids, healthcare. If you've got a wife or a partner, if they've got a job, they're going to have to look for new work elsewhere as well and relocate. It takes a toll. And hence we see the same faces recurring as they get another job, they're getting another job, they're getting recycled, is because young coaches just don't want to do it. They're not willing to have to constantly relocate and start again every 18 months to 3 years. They're not given job security. Contracts are not worth the paper they're printed on, because you might sign a 3-year deal to, initial 3-year deal to coach a team or manage a team, and you're sacked within 18 months. That's just no job security. Contracts aren't worth the money that they're printed on. And it's the same with referees, and discussing the standard of refereeing and why we're struggling to retain and recruit referees. It's I think with refereeing, there's a little bit more job security, but then the David Coote situation and what we find ourselves in is quite troubling as well. And it does raise the question of refereeing integrity, but at the same time, referees, as we've seen for some time, the quality and the standard is not good enough. And I think that's a fair assessment of where match day officiating is currently at in English football and Scottish football for that matter. But we've seen the same questions raised in the NHL, Major League Baseball, the NRL, the AFL, Rugby Union, Super League, Rugby League as well. It doesn't matter the sport, the same issues are arising of quality of officiating, recruitment and retention of officials, and also when you do recruit them, improving the training quality as well. Now, a lot of sports, the officials are all full time now, and they're fully salaried and they're fully paid, and they have their own union to cover, protect them. So they have the referees union, quite literally. So they've got employment protections, and they're paid decently, because the concern is that with low pay there, and lack of opportunity, there may be match fixing, taking bribes, throwing games, that kind of thing. So we've gone full circle. We discussed Mark King and snooker and the situation snooker finds itself in. We've covered that on the channel with the video and discussing his suspension and his ban. The same thing is, with referees. They are open to be bought and, bribed. It is a thing. And, recruitment and retention. There are calls to get, international refs to start reffing the English game. There are calls to bring in international refs to help improve the English and Scottish officiating standard. And there's a lot of calls on the domestic FAs in England and Scotland to improve and discuss improving the salaries that are offered to match day officials in order to improve retention and keep referees involved in the game. Because there is a recruitment and retention problem. They're not recruiting enough and they're not keeping enough. And unfortunately, the standard is dropping. But at the same time, with the rise of social media and how much criticism, which sometimes is legitimately referees sometimes do deserve legitimate criticism. I think that is legitimate. But social media, especially over the last 10, 15 years, with how social media has grown from what its humble beginnings to what it is now, the abuse and just social media and how that avenue of things has gone. As I say, it doesn't help. You've got to be very, very thick-skinned and of a certain mindset to do any form of match day officiating long term. Otherwise, you end up a meme. You end up on a fan page being trolled and becoming an internet meme. Well, Luke Littler, I mean, quite honestly, Luke Littler, I mean, he's ridiculous what he's doing at this age, and he's the fact he's 7 is ridiculous. It is ridiculous. He can't even legally buy a pint in a pub. If he's still doing this at, let's say, 27 or 37, so in 10, 20 years' time, I mean, crikey, how many ranking titles could he win? How much prize money could he win? You know, I have to admit, he's got a very, very sensible, mature head on very young shoulders. He's very, very sensible and mature, and he comes across as really, you know, a likable young lad, which I think is very, very rare when you have a professional. I've got to be careful how I word this because they're not really athletes, but when you have someone entering a professional sport at such a young age and bursting onto the scene in an individual or team sport, it's so common for them to go off the rails and have issues. And for a long time, we thought Tiger Woods actually bucked that trend. And then it transpired he really hadn't bucked the trend. He just fell apart off the course very, very quickly when it came to golf. But there was a period where people thought Tiger Woods has bucked this trend of being this young superstar and staying level-headed. In reality, he was anything but you know, but Luke Littler, I mean, he's doing things at a young age a lot and very quickly. It's all tournament after tournament after tournament. And he's I mean, it's crazy to think that I am 18 years older than him. I'm 18 years older than him. That's what's scary. That's generally what's terrifying. I believe, crikey, I was taking my GCSEs the year he was born. That's ridiculous. You know, I was, yeah, that is, no. I was taking my first attempt at A-level. Oh, God. Okay, I'm officially old, so moving on. You're noticing a lot of sports that there's just so much money and the hunger disappears. You could argue that, yes. There's definitely issues with, you know, especially I'm going to say more the team sports with revenue distribution and fair revenue distribution in sports. In regards to prize money in individual sports, I mean, look, Luke Littler's doing great things in darts. Van Gerwen, maybe he's won so much that he's content to, you know, wind his career down. Go to snooker, Mark King, high profile player, match fixing, banned for 5 years. So there's definitely massive problems in a lot of sports. And again, it comes down to how prize money is distributed and how they work out per tournament, how the prize money is broken up from where you get to and where you finish. Am I surprised that Mark King is the player getting the ban? No. Am I surprised it's another high-profile player in snooker getting a ban? No. Am I? Can snooker eradicate it? Get rid of the Hearns. Get rid of the Hearns from involvement. honestly, wherever Eddie and Barry Hearn go, the stench of corruption and sleaze follows. But I fear that horse has bolted, and it's a bit late to shut the gate because the horse is already in the next field. So my personal views on it aside, can snooker fix the problem? They're not the only sport with this problem, because tennis has also been highlighted as another individualistic sport where there is a similar issue. But in tennis's case, it's more to do with lower ranking players. Mark King is one of the higher ranked players who's been suspended for and banned for match fixing. So that throws that theory out the window in regards to they're having similar issues. We've got to look at tournaments and how the prize money works out, and uh, there is definitely something with snooker. As I said, you would have thought when Stephen Lee got caught all those years ago, that would be the wake up call the sport needed, and the watershed moment saying this can never happen again. It's happened multiple times since Stephen Lee got his initial ban. So, I mean, Mark King, as I say, has the right to appeal. He's got what till I think it's the 28th of November where he can lodge his appeal by. I don't think he does. I think he's done. And well, Quinton Han, I believe he was accused of a lot of things. Match fixing, I think, was one of them, but sexual assault and affray, GBH, drunken assault, drug taking. I think he headbutted a reporter. Um, he was accused of a lot of things and found guilty of a lot of things as well. May I just add? I think, yeah, drug use and supplied. Was he accused of match fixing? I can't. I know he was never banned for it, but there were allegations that he was throwing frames and throwing games and but there was other things going on, like I don't know, inappropriate actions with the opposite gender. Um, um, he really, yeah. There was a this is at a time when snooker was not as big as it is now and had less ranking tournaments, and then there was less money in the sport, and you really had to do well in tournaments to earn your keep on the professional circuit. There were less professionals at the time as well. The Hearns being interviewed, they don't like being. Oh yeah, you've got to be arse liquor to interview the Hearns. You can't call them out on their BS. Eddie Hearn especially. You know, or was it Barry Hearn? No, is Eddie the son? Is Barry the dad? I can't remember. Yeah, no, they don't like being held to account. Um, yeah, they don't like being held to account, and really pushed on some of because they also used to own Leighton Orient. I think his dad used to own, and then they sold up, and then Leighton Orient went down ended up in the non-league for a while. Um, so there was question marks over their ownership of Leighton Orient and the direction they took that club and who they sold that club to. Um, but can they eradicate match fixing? I think they need to work with the authorities. Obviously, the two matches in question that got Mark King his ban were flagged by the betting companies because they do have fail safes, and we can all argue the pros and cons of sports betting and sports betting sponsorship with all the bookmakers. And you look at snooker, the majority of snooker tournaments are sponsored by gambling firms. So you know, you've got to look at the correlation between betting companies sponsoring players and events and match fixing allegations. We've seen it in so many sports now. So many sports. We've seen it this year in North America with multiple players getting bans for breaching betting rules. So it, that there is this lingering situation. And unfortunately, they've either got to find different sponsors that aren't gambling firms to start sponsoring events. They've either got to stop the players having personal sponsors who are gambling companies. There's got to be, and it's a difficult one because we've got a lot of. There's the potential for the legislation through because there was big talk a few years back about legislation in regards to changing the legislation over gambling ads on TV and sports being sponsored by gambling firms and reducing the visibility of gambling firms as sponsors. And snooker is one of those sports that has now become so reliant on the gambling sponsorship that if they were to lose it, I'm not sure what other kind of corporate entities could come in with the same amount of money and replicate the same sponsorship deals. I really don't. So they are a very vulnerable sport right now in regards to just the sponsorship alone, and losing that would be economically catastrophic. How do they fix it? They've got to have better working relationship potentially, or a more transparent working relationship with the authorities. The fact Mark King was suspended for the best part of 2 years is a bit of an eyebrow raiser, considering it was only 2 matches, not more. John Higgins is obviously involved in one of those matches, so eyebrows are going to be raised because he's been accused of it, and he was found guilty to have accepted bribes to throw matches, although he didn't throw the matches, he just took the money and then decided not to do it. And he doesn't like being questioned on that. So there's definitely, I think more players have definitely been involved. I think a lot of players have got away with it for now. But there's going to be someone who blows the whistle big time. There will be someone who blows the whistle big time and spills the beans. And I do think there's going to be a much bigger scandal involving a very, very high profile player. And you could insert name of player, and it could be any player. Pick a player. You've got your big names like your Ronnie O'Sullivans and your Judd Trumps and your Neil Robertsons, for example. I mean, if one of those 3 was to end up with allegations against them, or a suspension or a ban, that really would, I think, break the internet because they are so well known globally, and they've got a much bigger following than Mark King. Mark King is a big name player, but only to snooker fans. If you were to have a Ronnie O'Sullivan or a Judd Trump or a Neil Robertson, for example, if one of those players who are that level above Mark King, and Mark King is a big name player, Stephen Lee was a big name player, but if one of those players was to end up in a match fit, I mean, the John Higgins one, how that didn't do more damage to snooker, even though he only was known to have taken the bribes, not fixed the matches. I mean, I just don't know. I think it's going to have to take potentially a player of that standing in the game with a bit more of a global appeal, a well-known figure, and that will. I mean, that will just send shockwaves through the sport that I don't think we've seen since whenever. I mean, a Mark Selby maybe. I mean, someone of that level who millions of people recognise, who are not even snooker fans, but because they regularly appear on the sports news and you hear them, okay, they've won this tournament, they've broken this record, they've done this or that. If it was like a Neil Robertson, Mark Selby, a Judd Trump, or Ronnie O'Sullivan, a player of that standing, I think then we suddenly go, shit, this is big problems. And Ronnie O'Sullivan's been very, very outspoken on the state of snooker, the match fixing allegations, where we're at. He's a firebrand. He's a well-known figure away from snooker. He's a bit of a household name, not just in the UK, but also in just the English-speaking world. That I think might really, really send shockwaves through the sport. Well, this is what I find funny about the Stephen Lee situation. So Mark King has another couple of, I think he's got another 2 weeks to lodge his appeal by and go through the appeals process for his 5-year ban. Stephen Lee still claims he's not guilty. Then why did he never appeal? If you that sure in your innocence, why has he never, ever gone through the appeals process? No, I'm being serious. If Stephen Lee keeps claiming he's not guilty, he's done nothing wrong, why has he not appealed his ban? Why has he never appealed? That's what stands out to me. I'm surprised he didn't get investigated by the police for fraud, because if you are defrauding the betting companies, you're committing fraud. If you're selling, information on betting patterns and you're deliberately losing so someone else can gain an advantage gambling, that's fraud. That's a criminal conspiracy. So there's a lot of unanswered questions and there's a lot of eyebrow raising, But when Stephen Lee got done, that stunned me. That I wasn't expecting that, and that's where I started falling out of love with the sport. Since then, we've had Stuart Bingham's had his 6-month ban for breaching betting rules. He even admitted his agent / manager was also involved, which raises a lot of questions on that one. And I do think he should have been suspended for longer, personally. And now we've got Mark King. I know there's a lot of other players as well, a lot of the Chinese. I know there's one with a lifetime ban. I've done other videos relating to snooker and match fixing, and it seems to me, that there is definitely a trend here in the number of players under investigation, suspended pending outcome investigation, or banned. And I know Stephen Lee's not the only player who's had a 10-year ban. I know there's a lifetime ban for another player, and Mark King's got 5 years. I think there's a few other players. I've done multiple videos when it comes to snooker on the channel, but the only time I seem to do snooker videos is when a player or players are implicated in match fixing. You look at my playlist on snooker, pretty much all of it is scandal, and it's all in the last 6-7 years. Basically, I think Stuart Bingham was the first snooker video I did, and that's when he basically admitted to breaching the betting rules that the governing body of snooker and billiards, have. And ever since the Stuart Bingham video, every video I've done is this player's bad, this player's under investigation, and it's not good. If the only time I'm doing content on the sport is on a negative, it shows that there is a problem, and this problem is not going away, and it is becoming so regular. It's becoming quite commonplace now that your individual players are being done for match fixing. And it's very worrying when it's high-profile players like Stephen Lee and Mark King. I would not be surprised if a bigger, higher-profile player, a more successful player, ends up under investigation, under suspicion, suspended or banned. And we are talking about the likes of a John Higgins. I'm using him as the example because he's been investigated before, and the allegations have been there. The fact, well, Stuart, in regards to what he's got his YouTube channel and he discusses stuff. I mean, look, he came out of retirement. That tells you that he may not be financially the best, in the best of financial straits. The fact that if that comes across as the best positive right now for the sport, that is deeply concerning. But I fear that the sport has allowed itself to get into this position, again, because of weak governance and the heavy reliance on gambling companies sponsoring the sport. And you could argue, yes, the tobacco sponsorship ban, okay, you could argue that's had some positive consequences, but also a lot of negatives. And I think the negatives are starting to outweigh the positives in regards to where the money comes from for sponsorship for individual players and tournaments. Yes, guess so. Oh, so basically, it's a bit like it's just a sports YouTube channel, partly to do with snooker. It's a podcast channel. It's snooker and other sports as well. Look, I was always a big fan of Stephen Hendry. I grew up my early formative years. He was the best player in the world. He was setting records, and he was very dominant. Very dominant player. Very good player. I think having him still involved in the sport is important. And I think he's actually come out of retirement for a few tournaments, but I think it's vitally important that they keep ex-players and him involved in the sport in some capacity, because I think the ex-players, the ex-pros, if they get involved in the administrative side of the sport, could be vital in cleaning it up with the corruption aspect and cleaning away, the corruption aspect. Oh, well, Embassy was a tobacco sponsor, so, but at the same time, I think it is vital that ex-pros are involved in the administration of the sport and involved in helping clean up the sport, because we are reaching a point now where the sport is going to be in crisis at some point, and eventually it is going to impact viewership figures, fan numbers, not just that, but also player development and new players taking up the sport and going up and seeing it as a viable professional career and seeing it as a fashionable sporting career choice. So, yeah, retention and recruitment of players, player development, players going from amateur to pro status. And also not just that, but fans will start switching off. Fans will start, the tickets won't sell for tournaments. Fans will not, want to watch. TV viewership will suffer. If these constant scandals continue, it's going to be very, very hard when they're going to have to find new sponsors that aren't gambling firms at some point if the trend when it comes to government legislation gets its way. Potential new investors are not going to want to, put their brand to a sport that is so corrupt. Anything the Hounds do improves the sport in their eyes. Well, yeah, it makes them money. It makes them money, and we have to question their involvement in the sport, and we have to question some of the commercial decisions the sport has taken, and we have to look at, you know, the sponsors of events, the sponsorship of players, the transparency of those sponsorship arrangements, and also making sure that all players get a decent prize pot at the end of their tournament appearance. Henry had Barry Hearn on his channel, and he was challenging him a bit, and he did not like it. It was funny. I think Stephen Hendry has earned the right to challenge, um, challenge the Hearns. I think he's earned the right. Look at his look at his success he's had in the look at the World Championships wins he's had. Look at the various ranking tournaments. He's one of the most successful players of all time. Brilliant player, one of the best players the sport's ever seen. He has earned the right to hold the Hearns to account and make them feel uncomfortable. He's earned the right to it, and Barry and Eddie just don't like being held to account. They and quite rightly. They've done some very dodgy deals over the many years. Got away with it, and I think Stephen Hendry, one of the biggest names in the sport, holding the people who've made the sport what it is today, for better and for worse, to account is vitally important. And I think having someone of the standing of Stephen Hendry, if he got involved in the admin side of the sport, I think the sport would be a lot better off than it currently is, in my opinion. I think the sport would be a hell of a lot better off if someone of the standing of Stephen Hendry was involved. But we talk about sports administration and getting more ex players involved in sports admin and in sports administration. And there are some pros and cons to that. Look at Michel Platini, for example, involved with UEFA. That didn't go so well. Not going to lie, that didn't go so well, if we're honest. But I do think it is important to have more ex-players and coaches actually actively involved in the sports administration in snooker, but in a lot of sports. I'm not saying it's always the best outcome, but it especially if they're of high standing and good, and they've had I would say good conduct and high standing. I think that could drastically change the direction we are seeing sport take over the last 20, 30 years. Because unfortunately, in my opinion, sports like football, rugby union, cricket, they're all going down a direction that is not a good direction. And I do fear for the future of a lot of sports. I really do. I really do. And snooker is one of those sports that I'm very concerned about where the sport is right now and what the future holds. I'm going to have to do a video on the number of players currently banned from snooker for match fixing. I will have to have a look at that. I have no doubt be surprised at the numbers. I know it's in double figures. I know it's quite a high number of players currently banned or suspended or under investigation for match fixing, and I dread to think the number of players. But there are some high profile ones in there. Snooker fans will know who these players are. I mean, the average sports fan may not, but when you've got high profile players getting lengthy bans, it is very, very worrying with where we're at. But anyway, I'm going to call that a day. Yes, the boxing was farcical. I heard there's a lot of issues with the streaming as well. Netflix did struggle to get the streams to work for people, um, partly because it's an internet service, so internet usage it just didn't want to work, and that is concerning considering that Netflix wants to get involved more long term and more permanently in live sports broadcast rights holding and bidding for it. It did struggle to live stream the event to all its users. So, not that I'll be watching the rerun or anything like that. I'm so glad I slept last night. Yeah, it's a bloke who's in his 60s struggling to breathe against a guy in his late 20s skipping around like a twat. And you can tell Jake Paul's on roids. You look at his physical body frame, how he was, and you look at him the last couple of years. That's more than just gym work. That's assisted with some supplements that aren't legal. That there is no way he's done that naturally to bulk up like that. He is just no. Because you look at his brother, and his brother is significantly slimmer, and you would think they share they you know, there's definitely definitely some form of I don't know anabolic steroid usage there, because unsanctioned fight. Apart from I think the Texas Board of Boxing Control, but it was basically a joke. And there's ways around, in and out of competition testing, because boxing is a farce of a sport anyway. When it comes to the drugs testing, because we know it's rife, that there is massive abuse of performance enhancing substances within the sport of boxing. Oh yeah, they were booing. It's obvious. You could hear the boos. People have been ripped off, but people are still paying for this crap. I'm not going to lie. People stop watching and paying for this crap. It will go away. The fact we're talking about it is exactly what the narcissist Paul brothers want. Jake and Logan Paul are narcissists. Let's not kid ourselves here. We're feeding their ego by talking about them. Doesn't matter if it's positive or negative. And I couldn't care less if they stumble across this live stream and give me a 30-second watch. I couldn't give a flying fuck. They damn near destroyed this platform, and they got away with it through, I don't know how they've managed to become so-called influencers, but unfortunately they made their names on this platform, and it's not because of jealousy, but the way they acted on the platform cost a lot of people their income for no fault of their own. And what they're famous for, being big dickheads, basically. Not having any... how they've managed to get into this position where they are now, there's going to be a big fall somewhere, and it's going to be a big tumble, and it's going to be fun when they do crash back down to earth and they become irrelevant again. It's going to be fun, because the whole suicide forest thing all those years ago, damaged the platform really badly. And hurt a lot of decent YouTubers. A lot of them lost their income altogether because they changed the monetization rules, including this channel. A lot of them gave up. I kept plugging away. In Japan, back in late 2017, early 2018, they really did some stupid stuff back in the day. And it's not the only controversies they've been involved in as a pair. There's a lot of legal issues they've had. I could go through it all, but I've read through all their controversies. They've had a lot of legal issues. There was a cryptocurrency fraud scheme, the Prime energy drink, which is basically toxic poison. Wouldn't even give that to a prisoner of war under torture. Wouldn't do it. I think other YouTubers. Oh God. Well, Mr. Beast has got his own issues right now. There's quite a few. KSI, well, he's in with the Paul brothers and all that prime crap. I show speed. Ring any bell? Not that I follow them either. KSI, what's he famous for? Playing FIFA really badly and being an Arsenal fan. Yay, and not being particularly intelligent. But he made a lot of money out of the Prime thing as well. I show speed. I have no idea who that is. Ring any? I really couldn't care less. I really couldn't care less. I don't compare myself to other people on the platform. I just have fun discussing sport and giving like a fan's viewpoint of where things are at and a viewpoint of where I think sport is at. Yeah, you pretty much summed up the Kardashians then. You've just summed up the Kardashians. No actual talent yet. Somehow they're minted. You've just summed up the Kardashian family. They have more plastic on them than a Mattel toy, but a Fisher Price kids toy. But there you go. This is the problem that the last, I would say, 2 decades, especially the last 10 or 15 years, has led to. We've given a platform for idiots with no talent to suddenly what? And reality TV is part of the problem as well. But social media has also given people a platform, and yeah. Oh god, I remember YouTube back in the early days. It was obviously YouTube has evolved as a platform and has definitely reached a point now, and it's going to be 20 years old I think next year. It's definitely evolved, and for good and for bad, there's some pros and cons, and you've got the monetization side of things and creator policies and a variety of pros and cons in regards to earning revenue and how they keep changing the monetization policies and the code of conduct and all this crap. And a lot of it was to do with a lot of the controversies that Jake and Logan Paul got up to, and they still get up to, and yet they're still, their notoriety has earned them even more money. But unfortunately, it's the cult of celebrity. It is the cult of celebrity and like a sort of a cult personality. I remember finding out a lot of these big earners and not just YouTube celebs, but the Hollywood elite, as we call them, aren't particularly nice people. And we at the end of the day, why I use the platform, ironically, yeah, I love my sport. I love talking about it. I love giving a viewpoint on it. And I think what we see is the media gives their narrative and their bias. And I think a lot of the average fan in the street, the average sports fan, I don't think their viewpoint gets heard. And I don't think what we are seeing is properly reported without a bias to it. Oh god, yeah, a lot of them, a lot of high-profile sports figures or sports presenters are now going down the podcast route or the YouTube route or various other video sharing platforms. There are some smaller ones other than YouTube and the podcast route, and they're it does show that some of the media industry have realised that the social media side of things is undercutting them, and the media landscape is changing and has changed. And some of the networks have realised this by having their own social media channels. Now, I will say this. I've got some big bugs in here. I will say this. I was going to call it a stream a few moments ago, but I think I'll answer a few more questions. Gary Lineker is obviously going to be stood, is going to be leaving Match the Day at the end of this season. And the question now is who's going to replace him because of the Jermaine Gina situation and what's obviously occurred there, which I think has really disrupted the BBC's timetable and plans. It's not necessarily a bad thing. But what we've seen with Football Focus and the disaster that's been since Alex Scott has been put in as the main presenter, and the bleeding of viewers. And a lot of the viewers that are left are women as well. And again, the way it's reported that if you disagree with having and social and a lot of people on social media are the whiny liberal left, as I call them, the loony left, because you've got the repugnant right and the loony left, and people in the middle, the common sense people, don't seem to have a voice anymore because a lot of the podcasts either lean to the right or the left, and if you're in the middle, like us, common sense people, it appears that to have a voice from a centrist position on anything, I'm going to focus on sport here. You don't. You don't. Are they still drawing in the same figures? No. Football Focus, the viewerships has dropped by 40%. Gone in space of 12 to 18 months. The viewership has just nearly halved, and they're bleeding viewers from their peak to what it is now. Match the Day, I think viewership is down from peak, but it's not on the same level of viewership turnover, of viewership loss. And I think the BBC, though, has been losing viewers for some time. Same with Channel 4. The BBC and Channel 4 have been losing viewership for some time. And in part because they've lost a lot of sports rights, and in part because there's just so many repeats now on TV. The BBC's faced a lot of criticism for handling a lot of things, damaged its own brand, and the TV license fee is another part to play in that. But they have been losing viewership. Yeah, you will, but is that copyright violation highlights and all sorts? But it's been noticeable, and it has been well reported that the viewership figures on Football Focus have fallen off a cliff. And if you criticise the appointment of Alex Scott, apparently you're a sexist, misogynist, and you're right wing. And I say no, she's just not very good at her job. Even when she covers women's football, she's crap. And I've watched a lot of WSL games, and she's just not very good. And it's not because she's a woman; it's because she's just not very good. Sorry, there are better ex-players of both the men's and women's games who could report on men's and women's football than Alex Scott. I'm sorry. They have basically put people in the position who are just not good enough at the expense of those who have been held back because either their skin color's not right, their gender's not right, or their sexual orientation doesn't quite fit the narrative. And this is where the BBC is making a lot of errors. Positive discrimination again. There are plenty of female pundits and ex-players who, ironically, when they have done coverage of internationals, I'm going with the international tournaments, are far better than Alex Scott. Just putting it out there. Not just on the BBC, but on any network you can think of. They are far better than her. And it's the same with the men's game. There are plenty of male pundits who aren't very good, and there are some who are very, very good who deserve a shot at presenting or co-presenting a program or commentary. I love Micah Richards. His enthusiasm is infectious. He's got a sense of humour, and he seems to be very, very well liked. And he's also still very, very young and has the potential. I don't watch TNT or Sky, so I can't comment on Thierry Henry and what he brings to the Champions League coverage or Premier League coverage. I can't comment on Thierry Henry, but look, I can comment on what live sport I watch, which is normally the internationals and the FA Cup, and so therefore you're going to get FA Cup coverage. It's going to be, well, Ian Wright's retired now; he's called it a day. But you're going to get your Micah Richards, you're going to get Roy Keane, and ex-players of that ilk. No, I've never watched the overlap because I have dignity, because it's a Sky thing, so I have dignity. I can't stand Neville or Carragher, so not being funny. I can't stand either of them. I've watched snippets of it, but I rather not. I can't stand them. Sorry, I just can't. How Jamie Carragher kept his job after, I mean, I know I could have done a bit better in regards to how I covered the Carragher phlegm explosion back in the day, but I can't stand them. I'm sorry. Good players that they were, can't stand them as commentators or pundits. I really would rather put a cordless drill through my head. Well, of course, at the moment, apart from the Nations League, that is the biggest thing in the sport in this country, is the ongoing scandal with David Coote, the referee, and Howard Webb's position as head in charge of the PGMOL, and what was known at the time, and what action they're going to take going forwards, and how many other referees, unfortunately, aren't behaving with integrity, because there is an integrity issue. Carragher, I think, look, Carragher, I mean, yeah, it was a bad look at the time. We've seen presenters and journalists sacked for less, but we've also seen other journalists get away with worse. So and presenters and players. So it swings and roundabouts. I think he's exceptionally lucky to still have a job in the media, considering what has happened since then with other high-profile media personalities and journalists, and ex-sports stars with but some of the stuff that was got away with before, that we now know about, and some of the culture within the mainstream media, the mainstream sports media. You know, I think a lot of people think he should have lost his job there and then. I think that viewpoint hasn't changed. Gary Neville's just he's white noise. And yeah, every podcast will go, hey, here's a word from our sponsor. So don't think just because Neville does it, he's the only one. Any podcasts, be it an independent or through a network, they always do that cringe advertising. Keane is just angry. Roy Keane, I look. Roy Keane is Roy Keane. He does what he says on the tin. He is a character. That's his personality. He's blunt and to the point. Oh, what's her name? Yeah, I know the female football player. Recently retired. Was actually quite good in the women's game, but no, you gotta have. Yeah, I know. At the same time, I'm not against women's football. I actually really enjoy women's football. It does have a place. It is enjoyable to watch. Jill Scott, yeah. I don't mind women's football per se. I think the way they could cover it could be better. They could balance the coverage better rather than force the coverage. I think that's the problem. Um, well, Jill Scott, though, but they don't talk about women's football on it. I mean, that's pointless then. But at the same time, she's a football fan and an ex-player, so she will have her viewpoint on the state of the men's game, and it would make a bit of sense, you know, talking about the women's game a little bit and the development and some of the issues that the women's game, which is very similar to the men's game, has, which is, suspensions, player misbehaviour, abuse of officials, the level of coaching, the level of officia. The same issues that affects the men's game also affects the women's game. They have their own separate issues as well, but I do think they. But then again, I don't watch or listen to it, so I can't comment on this podcast because I have no interest in it. I know a lot of people do, but there'll be a lot of people who don't really care for it either. Um, there are some sports podcasts I do listen to. There's some I used to listen to that I don't listen to anymore, just because it's you listen to some of them and they're like, well, all they're really doing is they're promoting their own products, or they haven't really. It's just more stroking their own fragile egos because they either couldn't cut it as a player in their chosen sport, or they didn't achieve much in their sport, but they're somehow still milking the sport for a living on the podcast. There are a few rugby league and ice hockey podcasts that I do listen to. Some I've stopped listening to. Um, I think we need to ask what happened to Matt Letizier's brain. Well, his daughter-in-law does porns. There you go. Just thought I'd drop that one in there. His daughter-in-law, does OnlyFans. His brain left 20 years ago, it seems. Oh, look, Matt Letizier. I brilliant player that he was. He's always been a bit controversial with some of his views on a lot of things. And unfortunately, you could argue his personal viewpoint on vaccinations, on politics, may have cost him his job at Sky. But when Comcast bought Sky off Sky B, off the Murdochs, when Comcast came along, they did state at the time that they were going to make structural changes and presenter lineup changes to their sports package. So he made the decision easy for management, who were already planning changes to presenting lineups and program lineups. So he made the decision easy to move on from him by opening his mouth and doing it. Basically, you're allowed to have an opinion. I do understand because he has been on Under the Kosh podcast, and to be fair, I stopped listening to that last year. I think that some of the stuff on there is just pure drivel, and a lot of it take with a pinch of salt. Some of the stuff they blabber on about, but I did listen to his interview on his guest appearance on Under the Kosh, and to be fair, he didn't go into his personal views on politics and vaccinations and those bits and pieces, but he did say how his departure from Sky was handled. Um, He wasn't sacked. They just didn't renew his contract. I think he might have said something on social media about vaccinations, and there was something to do with something political. This is where sport and politics are not a good mix. But I will say this: anyone who says that he would still be at Sky regardless of his views is mistaken. When Sky Sports on the Sky network was basically purchased from B Sky B by Comcast because they wouldn't allow the Murdoch Group to basically fully take over as majority shareholders. So they sold their stake to Comcast, and Comcast is American. And Comcast did state when they took over that the first year they were in charge, they were going to make no changes. Okay. And then they did state that they were going to make structural changes when the next round of TV deal comes along. They've made their structural changes, and lo and behold, Soccer AM's gone, and Soccer Saturday, there's been massive changes in the lineup. They've basically gone and taken a chainsaw basically through the lineup, and they've changed the presenting lineup. They said they were going to make structural changes. They were going to make changes, to programming, and they've done that. They've made changes to show formats. They've made changes to the Sky package with different Sky channels. They did say they were going to make structural changes. So Matt Letizia, if anyone thinks that he was still going to have a job now, regardless of his personal views, is mistaken. They've all gone, pretty much. They have gone through there with a wrecking ball. And you could argue that's good and bad. Now, at the same time, I was never a massive fan of Soccer AM. Not gonna lie, never really. I've watched the occasion. I watched it occasionally, but it wasn't really a big thing in our household. Growing up, now since I moved out of my mum's house when I was 16, so I moved out years ago. I moved out 18 years ago, but now, yes, my mum's household, they do watch, and they do have full TNT and Sky Sports. They have all the sports packages. So when I go around there and there's sport on, I will watch whatever's on. Normally at the Christmas period, I will watch the Boxing Day Test match when England play the first test of the Winter Series. I will watch the first day of the first test. It's tradition. It's a thing. But in all, in all seriousness, I was never really a fan of Soccer Saturday or Soccer AM. Not really. It wasn't really my thing. Partly because I was either at work or actually doing stuff, because it just never was my thing. My grandparents never had Sky Sports or Sky TV. They were very much against the Murdochs. They were not Murdoch, and this is when B Sky B was my minority stake of B Sky B was Murdoch's, ownership. They weren't massive fans of the Murdoch media, and so it wasn't a thing in our household. Although my granddad did read the Times, and the Times was still owned by the Murdochs now. That was the only Sky publication in the household, was the Times. So they weren't massive fans of the Murdochs, so we didn't have Sky. Obviously, there's those free-to-air Sky channels you can get on Freeview, but Sky Sports wasn't a thing. And so at the end of the day, looking back on it, I think potentially that shaped my fandom of sport a little bit, and my viewpoints on certain things. Although, look, as I say, I do try and stay unbiased, although I have certain viewpoints when it comes to, the sports presenting and the quality of sports journalism. I do think there has been a negative impact, and part of that is the politicization and I wouldn't say woke brigade, but the tick box positive discrimination. We need more women. We need more people of minority backgrounds on the TV when they're not necessarily the best for the job. Now, the way to do that at grassroots, actually have more, outreach, community outreach into the minority communities with media courses, with sports coaching badges. Yes, you need to do it at grassroots, not from the top down. It needs to be from the bottom up. But the way the media managers have gone about it is the wrong way. It's impacting viewership figures, and unfortunately, media suffering as a result. That I can call out. There are plenty of great female presenters and pundits, and there's plenty of really good up and coming, journos from minority backgrounds who are very, very capable of what they do, who are working hard to make the progression up the greasy pole. When they're just gone, there you go, we're going to promote this person over all that, it does impact things. Yeah, there is that resentment, yes. No, Chris Kamara really is like that. He is actually quite funny. He does have his Chris Kamara-isms. Chris, the thing is, as I say, Sky Sports wasn't a big thing when I was growing up. We had it every now. It was, but it wasn't. So we did have all the sports channels back in the day, partly because of my dad, and his armed forces discount and all that. But between, I would say, 1998, about 99, 2000, early 2000s, and about 2006, I didn't really watch Sky Sports. It was only as an adult visiting my mum and my stepdad and all that, and they have Sky Sports. Okay, I'll give that a watch. But in reality, it wasn't a big thing in my teenage years, you could argue, which potentially has shaped my view on sports journalism, sports coverage, and the lack of choice we have when it comes to the sports media. But at the same time, as I say, my grandparents weren't. Both sets of grandparents weren't fans on the Murdoch media. So again, you could infer from that what you will. But in the 90s, I grew up with Eurosport, I grew up with ESPN, I grew up with the North American channels, I grew up with Sky Sports. So in that regard, I was kind of fortunate, and I grew up with the Aussie sports as well, because we had an international sports package. So I was quite lucky in the 90s, but in the 2000s and the early 2010s, partly because of my living situation. As I say, my view on sports broadcasting has been shaped partly because of my upbringing and my living situation, and partly the sports that I watch. Eurosport is still going for now, but it will be merged fully with TNT Sports by 2026. And that would be a crying ass shame, but that is how it is. You could argue that's negative and it goes against competition, but Eurosport and TNT Sports are both owned by the same people, so they're going to merge it together. Eurosport started in the 90s, late 80s, early 90s with the, I can't remember exactly when, but I grew up with it. I have fond memories of Eurosport, very fond memories as a kid. And I'm surprised it's still going now, but as I say, I have very fond memories of Eurosport as a kid growing up. Again, in the 90s and early 2000s, and then yes, they did have a lot of tennis on there, which I think helped tennis's appeal across Europe. They had a lot of motorsport on there as well, which again helps certain categories of motorsport other than, and I think they had F1 on there as well, but they had a lot of motorsport on there, which again helps with superbikes, MotoGP, motocross, rallying. It definitely helped a lot of sports reach a wider audience across the continent. But tennis definitely had a massive, massive boost from being on Eurosport. Massive boost. Um, and Tour de France and the Vuelta and the Giro, the three Grand Tours. The Tour de France obviously is a big one. That was their big money maker in the summer. That was their, and still remains their golden goose. But the Vuelta and the Giro gained importance and gained viewership and gained sponsors because of Eurosport. So the Tour de France, everyone talks about the Tour de France, biggest cycle race, but the Giro and the Vuelta, the other two classics, were lagging behind for so long. Eurosport really brought them added attention and added eyes on the product, added views, and which helps with sponsors, viewership, money, prize money. Setanta's still going. Setanta was Irish, and Setanta's still going under license across Europe in various countries. But Setanta Sports, oh god, that was a disaster, wasn't it? That's where ESPN used to have their slot back in the day. Absolute disaster, and had massive, massive consequences for the UK and Irish broadcasting landscape, because that's why BT Sport came in. And BT Sport obviously has failed because it's now TNT Sports because it didn't make any money. But sports broadcasting is changing, and we're seeing, as I say, look at North America, look at the layoffs, look at the collapse of the regional sports market, look at the fact that the TV deal, when it next comes around in Canada, is going to be worth less. And when the next TV deals are negotiated, for example, across the world, we have plateaued. Streaming services can only make up so much ground in regards to, the money side of things. But the media rights deals, I think, have flatlined now, and streaming options. Well, TNT were dynamite. TNT Sports. I mean, Christ. The owners of TNT Sports have pulled out of the US regional sports market. So make of that what you will. They were making massive losses, and they've taken on a loss-making network here. How long will it be TNT Sports? If TNT Sports, formerly BT Sports, goes belly up, then we are in serious. I think that would have serious consequences for professional sport in general. Netflix last night. I mean, look, I personally slept through it. Couldn't give a tinker's cuss. Couldn't give a flying pig. Personally, I couldn't care less what happened last night in the boxing. But when I woke up this morning and I was reading the social media posts and going on fan forums, sports fan forum, that was shit. Oh, I couldn't watch it. It was buffering. So Netflix wanting to get in there on the live sports broadcasting and bidding for sports rights last night was a wake up call that, yeah, they're still not. I don't think they're ready to do it. And apparently the commentary was terrible as well. The commentary was terrible. The actual product was terrible. The connectivity was terrible. A lot of people just wanted Jake Paul just to be badly hurt. It didn't happen. So we've got to find a boxer who's going to knock him out. A professional boxer who's going to knock him out. Yeah, it's a fight that should never been sanctioned because of Mike Tyson's age and Jake Paul's lack of experience. They sanctioned it. It managed to get sanctioned, and it was farcical. So it wasn't great. Yes, a real poor heavyweight, a current active heavyweight boxer who's not very good beat him. Yes, let that sink in. A pretty average boxer who's not very good beat him. So yeah, it shows that boxing is allowing this to happen, which says to me boxing is in crisis. A sport that constantly uses gimmicks, because this is not the first YouTube fight, it won't be the last one. A sport that uses gimmicks and constantly has rule tweaks and changes and anything like that is a sport in crisis. I said the same about British touring cars. Next season, they're going to sustainable racing fuels, which are basically biofuels, right? They've had 3 years of the hybrid era. It has failed. So, and it's cost them. So, when you have a motorsport category that's now changing its regulations so quickly after really pushing for the hybrid era, it says to me British touring cars is in crisis again. Another load of regulation and rule changes. That's not good. Then you have F1 with all its rule changes and format changes. That is a sport that is constantly tweaking its rules, bringing in these gimmicks and regulation changes is a sport in crisis. So boxing, with all these YouTubers doing these stupid, potentially should not be sanctioned, whatever fights, and this culminating, it tells you it is a sport in crisis. The Conor McGregor Floyd Mayweather fight should never have happened. That was farcical. It says to me boxing is in the decline rapidly. And of course, we're already having the discussion about head injuries, concussions, CTE, long-term impacts, and mitigating them. I can't see boxing as a sport or UFC, MMA. Well, UFC is the promotion for that particular thing, but MMA and boxing going, but much longer. But we shall see. But anyway, I'm going to call that a stream. It's now 10 o'clock. I've got some friends coming over tomorrow, so need to get a little bit sorted for tomorrow, for when tomorrow comes. But I really appreciate the discussion. Yeah. And of course, Mike Tyson, I'm surprised they even sanctioned it, considering he was 58, hadn't boxed for 19 years, has got some health issues, and farcical. Honestly, farcical. But I'm going to leave that there. I really appreciate the conversation this evening. Always much to talk about. And yeah, I will have more content for you guys tomorrow. I think I've got some good video ideas for tomorrow, but for now, I'm going to call it a night, and I'll have content for you guys tomorrow. So for me, for now, it is goodbye.